Morning, members. Welcome back to our chamber after a long absence from here. It's nice to be back in the chamber. It's nice to see your faces in the place again, rather than looking on that small screen at each other. We're going to start this morning as usual with prayers, and Madam Clerk.
The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Lord, have mercy upon us. Lord, have mercy upon us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ, his sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members, the House is now in session. You can be seated. Each of you should have order paper for today in front of you on your desk, and we'll follow the proceedings as laid out on the order paper. I'll now give the opening words of condolences. When I complete my remarks, the Madam President will give hers. I'll call on her. After the Madam President is finished, I'll call on the Premier to move the motion and to give his remarks. The opposition leader will then be called on, and then we'll call off the list of members who have indicated they wish to speak this morning. With that said, it is with great respect that I rise to say a few words in tribute to our late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. I believe most of us within this chamber, as I look around this morning, are under the age of 70, most of us, which means we have experienced none other monarch other than the late Majesty. She has embedded in us the standard of which is expected of a monarch, a standard that seems to she has never wavered from during her long reign of service. After her ascension in February 1952, Bermuda was the first colony that she visited. And like all our visitors to this island, she was drawn to return, and indeed she did, gracing our shores on a further 3 occasions in 1975, 1994, and 2009, plus 2 stopovers in 1976 and 1983. I can't speak to the first 2 visits or the stopovers, as the first was before I was born. And I was overseas in school during her visits in the 70s and 83. However, personally, I can remember the last 2 visits, particularly the last visit, because I had the good fortune of greeting Prince Philip upon his arrival outside the Clock Tower building in Dockyard. And photos of that greeting went around the world. No, not because he was meeting me, even though on an occasion I have implied that it was because of me. But the real truth is that it was because of a colorful pair of Bermuda shorts that were given to him as a present. I then escorted himself upstairs where he joined the Queen in chatting with the surviving members of the dockyard apprentices, who decades earlier had trained in the UK as tradesmen. It was a charming moment as together the Queen and Prince Philip reflected on those years with the apprentice. As mourning continues, we get to remember that although at times she may have seemed larger than life, the late Queen throughout it all was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and collectively we share in this family's loss and offer our deepest sympathies as they share their loss with people around the world. At times like this, we are reminded that with every rain comes sunshine, and the Queen's passing brings the dawn of a new era, when most of us throughout the Commonwealth, will for the first time be saying, "Long live the King." Those of us all under 70, right? And as this new era begins, it was just a couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of spending time with King Charles at one of the royal residence whilst I was in the UK for the first meeting between the OT speakers and the UK speaker. Unlike his mother, he brought a personal touch to each conversation. In our conversation, he took delight in asking how immensely proud I must be to have my son in Parliament with me. I agreed with him and then joked about how many of my family had photos with his family. It was one of those rare personal moments that we both joked about and laughed about. Let us also reflect that this new era brings change, a change that comes because of the loss of our longest-serving monarch, but change yet still. And as the UK and its people embrace this change, let us likewise embrace the need for change. My deepest sympathies are with the Majesty, the King, and all other members of the royal family to whom I offer my most sincere condolences and support at this very, very sad time. As I close, allow me to do a bit of housekeeping. The tributes will be done as they were in the UK Parliament. Members will be called per the list of members who have indicated their desire to speak, rather than the custom of having members jump to their feet and try to catch the eye of the speaker. This will be done to honor the reverence of this solemn occasion. With that said, I call on the Madam President to give her remarks.
I'm very pleased to give these brief remarks on Queen Elizabeth II on the occasion of her death on September the 8th, 2022, at age 96. Queen Elizabeth II visited Bermuda on 4 occasions. On her first visit in 1953, I was one of many school children who went to Front Street to wave a flag of greeting to her. And on her 3rd visit to these islands, I had the occasion to see her when she visited King Edward VII Memorial Hospital and talked to a number of patients. Queen Elizabeth II was considered a trailblazer. She was, in fact, a sole woman on the world stage during her 70 years of rule. Many people speak of her dedication and her steadfastness to the role of queen. Further, that she had a profound respect for service and duty, which was reflected in the manner in which she ruled. Indeed, this was highlighted at age 21, while in South Africa, she had stated the following: "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." This she did over the past 70 years, right up until her death. In fact, only 2 days before her death, she swore in the new Prime Minister of Britain, Liz Truss. Queen Elizabeth II was an inspirational role model to many. There are many quotes attributed to her, and the one I wish to share at this time is the quote she made on leadership in a speech before the United Nations, and here I quote her below. "I know of no single formula for success, but over the years, I have observed that some attributes of leadership are universal and are often about finding ways of encouraging people to combine their insights, their enthusiasm, and their inspiration to work together." I do believe that this quote has relevance for us here in this chamber. May Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace. In closing, I hereby offer my deepest condolences to her son, King Charles III, and the entire royal family. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Premier?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House do now take under consideration the following motion. That this Honorable House conveys its deepest sorrow on the death of Her Majesty the Queen, expresses its sincere condolences to His Majesty the King and other members of the royal family, and recognizes her association with Bermuda and her people.
No objections to that motion, is there? None. Continue, Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we convene in this rare fashion today, a joint session of the legislature to reflect on an historic life of committed service and incomparable duty. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II lived an incredible, almost surreal life, one of great privilege, but also a life dominated by certain core ideals to which we can all relate, irrespective of her elevated status. Mr. Speaker, in the last picture of the Queen, inviting her 15th Prime Minister to form a government, it is ironic to think that the frail hand extended to the new Prime Minister is a hand kissed by Winston Churchill, a hand that danced with Gerald Ford, a hand that waved to millions across so many countries. In extending that hand for that final time, the Queen demonstrated to the world that she had been true to the vow that she had made in 1947 to devote her life to service. Mr. Speaker, none of us, not even kings and queens, can decide the circumstances into which we are born. But it is what we make of our lives that determines how we are remembered, or if we become a footnote to the long story of life. Mr. Speaker, even at the age of 96, Her Majesty's death has shocked many. Her life and the constancy of her service meant that whether we warmed to the idea of the monarchy or not, the Queen was the single most immovable feature on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, even the world's most ardent Republicans have been compelled to salute Her Majesty's life of unparalleled devotion to duty. With her passing so soon after the observance of the Platinum Jubilee, we have been reminded that the 70 years during which the Queen served the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth have been marked by such remarkable global change. Change that she not only weathered, but through which she thrived. For all the tradition and the age-old ritual that surrounds the institution of the British monarchy, this Queen struck that enviable balance between preserving the past and embracing the future. Her coronation made history by being televised, permitting a technological intrusion into the centuries-old ceremony. And at her death, she was the owner of an iPad, amongst the latest iterations of the technology which came about during her 70-year reign. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty was variously known as a symbol or a figurehead. But in truth, Mr. Speaker, she was a leader. Asked why she tended to wear bright colors when on official engagements, the Queen famously replied, "I must be seen to be believed." Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty was forced to overcome a natural shyness and to mitigate the challenge presented by her small stature. Despite, and perhaps because of, these qualities, she determined early that leadership in or from the shadows would not be acceptable to her people. That steadfast devotion to duty that has been the refrain of every remembrance the world over, and I'm sure will be in this chamber today, meant that just 2 days before her death, she discharged the constitutional functions of her role, even when there were others who might have done so in her stead. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda has hosted numerous royal visits. However, none have generated the level of local interest as those of the Queen. Some honorable members will recall her most recent visit in 2009 for Bermuda's 400th anniversary of settlement. That visit culminated in a state dinner hosted by the then Premier Ewart Brown at Tucker's Point. Mr. Speaker, it is said that the menu that night featured various local dishes, from rockfish to seasonal vegetables. But the intrigue of the evening surrounded that local delicacy, cassava pie. After some diplomatic assurance from her hosts, I am pleased to share that the royal palate can be said to have sampled that unique Bermudian dish. Mr. Speaker, the embedded constitution of the institution of the British monarchy means that a king now assumes the throne, and with great pageantry, the end of one era and the dawn of another has been recognized around the world. Mr. Speaker, as I observed on the day of the Queen's passing, more than a monarch, she was the matriarch of a family, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. On behalf of the government and people of Bermuda, we extend our sincere condolences to His Majesty the King, the Queen Consort, their Royal Highnesses the Prince and Princess of Wales, and the entire royal family. The loss of a mother and grandmother is felt equally, whether her picture hangs with those with the rest of the family on a living room wall, rests on a bedside table, or whether her picture happens to be on the currency. Mr. Speaker, let us reflect on the Queen's decade of undimmed duty and service, and her quiet but steadfast leadership and devotion over a long and well-lived life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. We now call on the Leader of the Opposition.
On behalf of the entire One Bermuda Alliance, we send our sincere condolences to His Majesty King Charles III and the royal family on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who died earlier this month. The 70-year-old reign, throughout the 70-year-old reign, the world witnessed her iconic calm, strength, and her ability to adjust to changes in society, even in the most challenging of times, both publicly and privately, by maintaining principles of freedom, justice, and democracy. She earned the respect of thousands of people from all walks of life, from the common person to presidents, kings, and queens around the world. Her son, His Royal Highness King Charles III, described his mother as a shining example of selfless duty. She upheld this commitment she made to be of service for the rest of her life, just days for the rest of her life, Just days before her death, the Queen held an audience with the UK outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the incoming new Prime Minister, the Honourable Liz Truss. She was up and about and held a productive meeting and demonstrated her selfless duty and service to the very end. Personally, I had the pleasure of meeting the Queen on 2 occasions, once in London at the Commonwealth Secretariat, and then here in Bermuda. In London, we shared our thoughts and our experiences with our common passion through the horses and equestrian sports. For the second occasion, we also spoke about the diversity of Commonwealth and the challenges that it brought. Very, very interesting, very, very enlightening to her experience. Mr. Speaker, we applaud her dedication to and the sense of communion with the people of the Commonwealth, the UK, and the British Overseas Territories by respecting and honoring their individual sovereignty. She played a vital role in the evolution and the development economically and socially of the Commonwealth family of nations. She did so by epitomizing a woman of grace, humility, dignity. Her religious convictions and beliefs daily guided her decisions as she encouraged people to focus on the future and do better. Despite the division of opinions, with many recalling the legacy of violent atrocities during the dark days of colonialism, the overwhelming sentiment of the death of the Queen appears to be of sorrow, loss, and a loss of a family member, whether we were connected by blood or just a member of the public. Interestingly, despite the Commonwealth's checkered past, the Commonwealth membership continues to grow, with Rwanda, Gambia, the Maldives joining between 2009 and 2020, and Gabon and Togo becoming members in June of this year, bringing the total Commonwealth member countries to 56 with a population of 2.6 billion people from the Pacific, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, Europe, the Pacific, and the Americas. The growth of the Commonwealth family is largely motivated by the desire to expand political, trade, social, and diplomatic relations beyond the Francophone network, and for having access to a variety of technical assistance, resources aimed at strengthening the institutions that support good governance, public sector, in the public sector, climate change and adaptation, and human rights framework. Mr. Speaker, I talk about the Commonwealth because, as you know, the Queen was passionate about the Commonwealth. She was passionate about the family members of the Commonwealth, and it was a priority to her during her 70-year reign. Mr. Speaker, it is my distinct honor to be here today to pay tribute on behalf of the opposition and the people of Bermuda. I extend our prayers and best wishes to His Majesty King Charles III, the Queen Consort, and the entire royal family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Opposition Leader. The next member we're calling on this morning will be the Deputy Opposition Leader, and with Mr. Richardson, MP Richardson.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
I rise this morning to pay tribute to the Her Majesty the Queen upon her passing, and to extend the condolences of my family and all those I represent to the new King, King Charles III, and his family as well. Mr. Speaker, not everyone, or I should say not every thing that we do in life is a job. In some cases, it's a calling. And you don't have to reply to every call. But she did at a very young age. She took on the weight that is royalty and wore it not as armor, but rather as a restraint. She surrendered some very basic rights that we all have. The right, for example, to have a public opinion. The right to become involved in everything that we desire. And she did that so that she could be emblematic of a greater good, not just in her corner of the world, but all over the world. She demonstrated grace and leadership in places and times when it wasn't necessary. She made sure that the entire world had someone to look to for steadiness, stability, for vision, for continuity. These things are not easy, Mr. Speaker, for any one of us to do on any given day. And she did that consistently for 70 years. To that end, she demonstrated the value of constitutionality, the value of believing in greater good, and she has become, for many, many people, not just a queen, but very much a grandmother, someone to look up to and someone to lead us in this new bold age. She leaves a legacy that is second to none. And I know that from speaking for myself, Mr. Speaker, I will always be humbled to think about someone who committed so much of herself to so much of the world. With that, Mr. Speaker, I again bring my condolences and pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Yep. Thank you, Government Whip, Opposition Whip, rather. We'll now call on the Opposition Senate Leader, Opposition MP Smith. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning.
Morning.
So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to join in the condolences to the new King Charles and the entire royal family with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. Mr. Speaker, I didn't have the opportunity to meet the Queen, as some people here have had that opportunity, but I will be able to say to you that I can speak from what my father, the late Hubert Smith Sr., told me of his opportunity to sit and have an actual opportunity to sit and talk with the Queen. Some people would know that he actually wrote a song that was played on the radio when she visited to the island, and he spoke fondly of that opportunity. He also always spoke fondly of the way the Queen talked to him personally during that conversation and what that meant to him. Mr. Speaker, for me, when I was thinking about this opportunity to give my words today, I thought about, over the 70 years, what could we learn from what the Queen did during her period of reign? Firstly, a young woman taking on a leadership role at a time that women were not given those kinds of opportunities to be in leadership. Over the 70 years, the progress of women in the world in leadership positions that were promoted by having a constant leader in the world that was a woman. When you think that she did it in a way where meeting with many of the top leaders in the world that were looked at as potentially tyrants at times, but the humble way that the Queen was able to maneuver the diplomacy that it takes to talk to people that you don't always agree with their beliefs. You don't always agree with the things that they do. Watching her adapt through those 70 years, the changes through time from coming out of a war period and seeing multiple opportunities to have to interact during conflict, and what that can show us and what we should take from that as a lesson for how we can behave as leaders in this country. I think when you reflect on how she led and what she was able to do behind closed doors and when she had the opportunity to speak to the world, that example of her grace and humbleness, the example of being able to step across the line and talk to people and work with people that you don't always agree with, is an example that we can pass on to the next generation by following in her lead. So once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give the condolences to the entire royal family and say that for someone that for my entire life has looked at, we have a queen, to now know that it is a king. Thank you to the queen for her entire reign, and she will be missed.
Thank you, Opposition Leader in the Senate. We'll now call on MP Swan. MP Swan, would you like to give your remarks?
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
It's so nice to be in your chamber
Nice to have you.
once again. Mr. Speaker, I wish to be associated with the condolences offered this morning to Her Majesty on her passing, her family on her passing, Mr. Speaker. I want to take a little different tack, Mr. Speaker, and speak of someone who came in my living room as a child. Anyone who is of my age would remember that television didn't come on and go off without a young lady wearing a crown who bore a resemblance to my queen, my mother, with a long neckline, similar features, and turn, color. Mr. Speaker, as young children, that was an image that stuck with not only my household, but I'm sure many households around the world that we often take for granted. 1953 was the time she chose to first come to Bermuda. But in early 1940s, her uncle, who by then was going by the Duke of Windsor, also graced our shores for the sport he beloved, called golf. And he played at the Mid-Ocean Club at a round that was featured and covered by no less in the newspaper by the great Louis Raphael Kid Corbin, who I have the honor of being part of cataloging his story. And he played with persons whose grandson sits in this honorable house today as well. So the royal connections of Bermuda, as being a part of Bermuda, go into the 40s, 50s. Her Majesty came to Bermuda in the 60s. And in 1975, when thanks to the Honorable former Speaker Walter Lister, I have pictures of her with one of my mentors, the late now, who passed away this year as well, Walter King, and he, who were young parliamentarians on the steps of Parliament. But it would take a hiatus of some 3 decades when many of our relatives to the south of us were becoming independent countries for the Queen to return to our shores. And during that time, when she returned to Bermuda, at that time, Mr. Speaker, I held a constitutional responsibility. So on this occasion, when I give condolences, I speak on behalf of my wife, who was honored this year amongst the last persons to ever be honored by the Queen, and a party that is often spoke to with ill tongue, and I could take it because, you know, I accept who I am, Mr. Speaker. And I speak on behalf of those who were in the United Bermuda Party, who many people choose not to embrace, and say that they were part of escorting the Queen around this country. The Honorable Lancelot Swan, I saw a picture of him, such a great youth minister taking the Queen around St. George's, where I am now a member of Parliament, proudly with all the children. And there are many children in this country that saw that. The example that we in this country need to take, whether we are for independence like I, or royalists like my wife, or closet royalists like many in this country, I say that all of us need to take the page out of the book of duty and service and commitment and know when it's time to say plenty and say nothing. Mr. Speaker, there are many lessons to be learned no matter where you sit in life, no matter what station you hail from. There are many lessons to be learned from the life of service of 70 years, who in one's 96 years got themselves up, dusted themselves off, purposefully did not put on gloves to greet the new Prime Minister of Britain, whose name is Elizabeth, like many around the world who were named after her, either by first or middle name. So I guess, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I'd say it's only room enough in Britain for one Liz, one Elizabeth, one Lilibet, and now there are only one of each. Still, I offer condolences from my station in life, Mr. Speaker, and urge all those who aim to serve, whether or not it be in public service or whether or not it be in elected service or in the civil service, that service and duty come with an understanding of protocol and respect of station. No matter whether you're for it or not, respect, as my mom used to say, and my grandmother used to say, is do a dog. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I offer profound condolences from a country boy from up in the valley who used to turn on or turn off his TV and see a young queen who turned on his TV and saw a 96-year-old lady serve her country until the bitter end with her boots on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Swan. Now I'll call on MP Dunkley. Would you like to make your remarks?
And good morning to colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I'm, like all members in this honorable House, certainly honored to have the opportunity to provide a tribute to Her Majesty Queen, and at the same time to send condolences to King Charles and the entire royal family on the passing last week of a truly remarkable person. As colleagues have said before me, Her Majesty reigned for 70 years and 214 days. She ascended to that position of prominence as the Queen and monarch at the very young age of 25 years, Mr. Speaker, and I think we should take some time to reflect on that. And through her reign, she managed to become popular and remain popular through most of her entire reign. That says a lot about who she was, what she stood for, and what she actually did. Mr. Speaker, it was apparent to me that aside from her ceremonial duties, the Queen was keenly interested in government and political affairs, and is rightly so credited for modernizing the monarchy. As the Honorable Senate President has said, on her 21st birthday tour through South Africa, broadcast to the British Commonwealth, she made the pledge that I declare to all of you that in my whole life, whether short or long, I shall be devoted to your service and the great service of this imperial family. And I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, after the Honorable President because those words prove so true and correct. Through that remarkable tenure, she backed up her words, and that leaves a very strong legacy. Mr. Speaker, like others in this honorable place, I was blessed to have an audience with Her Majesty, and it was truly an enjoyable time. She refused to talk about political matters, but instead talked about her time in Bermuda and the time while she stayed and enjoyed the comforts of Government House, sampling the Dunkley's blue milk. And while her aide was keen to have the conversation move somewhere else, the Queen wouldn't let it go and wanted to know about the process. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have learned a few things in life, and it's when the Queen is talking to you or with you, you certainly don't listen to the aide, you listen to the Queen. Mr. Speaker, I have always held the Queen in the highest regard with the deepest respect and admiration for Her Majesty. I have been blessed to be Premier of this island that we all love, to serve in Parliament for over 25 years, and all of that time under Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. My heart is heavy today, like millions of people around the world, but I'm comforted as per the message the Queen sent to the U.S. after the horrific terrorist attacks on September 11th. The Queen's message was read out by the the UK ambassador to the U.S., and it said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." Mr. Speaker, I have certainly grieved with my family since the passing of Her Majesty last week. But I'm comforted by the fact that she was an impressive leader who served through many generations. There's no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that she will be greatly missed, but she's left a mark on the UK, all the territories, and indeed, the entire world. It was her guidance as Queen that has built up a track record that is certainly admirable and will never be forgotten. So, Mr. Speaker, from my family to King Charles and the entire royal family, may they be blessed by the Lord, and may be they comforted and given strength by the Lord during this very difficult period. Mr. Speaker, may Her Majesty rest in peace.
Thank you, MP. Senator Wright, would you like to add your contribution at this point?
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
I'm honored to have the opportunity to say a few words about the Queen and her remarkable life. Like the House Speaker, I was born after the Queen started her reign 70 years ago. As a kindergarten student in Canada, one of my early memories in life was singing "God Save the Queen" as we started every day in school. Now, as a 37-year resident of Southampton, I often walk down St. Anne's Road past the plaque in her honor near Gibbs Hill Lighthouse that she admired so much. I believe this was a visit in 1953, and she stopped and she just stood there and for several minutes admired the view that we all love looking across the Great Sound. I have two daughters, 30 and 29, who look to female role models to emulate in life. The grace and values that she has exhibited her entire life and are in my view exemplary for females and indeed all to emulate. Her leadership during the pandemic, the words of comfort that she offered not just to millions in the UK, but to millions around the world, is a recent example for me of her tremendous leadership skills. I offer my condolences to King Charles and the entire royal family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. The next member we'll call on is MP Kennedy. MP Kennedy, would you like to make your contribution?
Good morning,
Morning.
Speaker and colleagues. First, let me say thank you to Her Excellency the Governor for declaring a holiday on the passing of our Queen Elizabeth. To you, Speaker, for making this opportunity possible today. And I'd also like to thank the Premier for his words of condolences to the royal family and for the fact that he is actually going to be traveling to the services. I believe it is fitting that we, for this occasion, the passing of a one-of-a-kind, quite frankly, I don't believe that we'll ever see another type like Queen Elizabeth, that we do our justice, as was said already, and give due respect for the passing of Queen Elizabeth. For many over the past few days, it's probably been a preoccupation about the life of Queen Elizabeth. And you can go on YouTube, and I'm sure many of us have, and learn a whole lot about things that you just did not know, and the humor that she had when meeting folks. Very lighthearted when you had the opportunity to meet her. In 1975, we mentioned that we had the opportunity of the Queen coming to Bermuda. I, like many of you, I'm looking around at similar age, would have been around 11, 12 years old. And my colleague Renee would know that St. George's was full. The schools were emptied and the streets were full for the opportunity to get a glimpse of the woman that we know as Queen Elizabeth. I did not have the privilege of meeting Queen Elizabeth. However, as we fast forward to today, I can say her cautious and wise judgment, her grace, her elegance and humility, her authority and efforts to move all towards common ground can be seen around the world. A real example of leadership, an exceptional life, one of a kind. Now, I did not have the privilege of meeting the Queen, as I mentioned, but I did have the privilege of meeting our now King Charles, who then was Prince Charles, at the World Islamic Economic Forum. And he has a similar attribute as of his mother. He has this odd humor, this kind of dry humor that you would have expected also from the Queen. And so in our deliberations, it was interesting to hear some of what he knew about Bermuda and some of what he actually didn't know. I was surprised, actually. I can say that of late, our King, who is someone who believes in green energy and the likes, it's going to be interesting to see the passing of this torch, per se, as he takes on this mammoth task. I would say he should not dare not try and attempt to be like his mother, but he should be himself. There is no way for him to fill those shoes but to be himself. And so, to King Charles and the royal family, I extend condolences. May our Queen rest in peace, and may we, as an island, continue to give due respect to the Queen, who has shown to us and to many around the world what it truly means to be a leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. MP Pearman, would you like to make your contribution at this time?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
And on this occasion, good morning to the Bermudian people. Mr. Speaker, the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth is a truly momentous occasion that has impacted billions of people throughout the globe, and not merely those 2 billion or so who are in the Commonwealth family. This is one of those significant events that causes us to pause and take stock of where we are in our own lives, our own short lives. It's an impactful milestone. To reign for more than 70 years on the throne of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth is a particularly rare achievement, as many speakers have recognized before me. The Queen has presided over a massive shift in the world, from the world of the 1950s all the way through to the world of today. 7 decades of very considerable and meaningful change. There are, of course, some few small voices who've offered criticism. Because she reigned over 2 decades, her reign at times clearly did witness, and must have witnessed, deep flaws and atrocities in humanity. But the truth is that during her reign, she was in effect the personification of the United Kingdom and her people. And of course, the United Kingdom and her people are not perfect. The United Kingdom is not perfect because humanity itself is imperfect. But as we humans go, Her Majesty the Queen has been a bastion of constancy, leading by her example to us all. Whether you are a devout monarchist or an ardent Republican, any objective assessment reveals a monarch who has demonstrated dignity, humility, grace, and quiet strength, a velvet anvil. Mr. Speaker, Queen Elizabeth demonstrated a sense of duty unparalleled. Unparalleled. In doing so, she became the cornerstone of English-speaking nations. Your people thank you, Your Majesty, and your people will miss you deeply. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. MP Jackson, would you like to make your contribution at this time?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
I'd like to be associated with the condolences for Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And I'd like to pay tribute to her as a role model for women. As I reflect on the life of Queen Elizabeth, I think about what it must have been like growing up. She would have thought that one day she would be a mother and a wife and live in the countryside, and her father would sit on the throne as king, and she would be able to live out her life according to the ways of the traditional role of the female as a mother and a wife. And to imagine in the early 20s, the age of 25, 26, being thrust unexpectedly, emotionally charged into a position of such significance is monumental. And to think that within days of imagining her life in the countryside with her family, she's now thrust into a position of having to rub shoulder to shoulder with world leaders, presidents, clergy, people way beyond anything that she would have imagined at the time. And for her to have dug deep as a woman to say, I'm going to take on this responsibility with dignity, with pride, and with commitment, as a woman, Mr. Speaker, is almost unimaginable. Queen Elizabeth didn't have the freedoms of thought and opinion that so many women in this world do have. But as a queen, she was able to do what she could for women. She pushed the bar forward for women. She stood as a representation of dignity. She stood as a representation of pride, and has inspired politicians female and male, but I'm speaking today as her role model for women. She inspired women. She inspired women in politics. And we have to give her great credit for that. She shouldered a responsibility, Mr. Speaker, that many in her family, older, arguably wiser, had run from. But she stood the course, Mr. Speaker. And I want to share my personal appreciation for that. She was a strong and steady woman, Mr. Speaker. She had pride and dignity, aspirations that many of us would only hope to achieve. And I'd like to end, Mr. Speaker, by saying that I feel deeply for the loss of this woman who every day of her life tried to live up to the impossible expectations of others. My condolences to her family. My condolences to all of those throughout the Commonwealth and the world who grieve the passing of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Jackson. Senator Dakuda, would you like to make your contribution at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have much of a personal story to tell. I did once go to lunch with the Queen at the National Museum. I did not see her, but I did sit with her dressmaker, so that will have to do. It was the Beatles, perhaps second only to the Queen in their global recognition, who sang, "Her Majesty is a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say. Her Majesty is a pretty nice girl, but she changes from day to day." Mr. Speaker, while I think we can all agree that the Beatles were correct and that Her Majesty was sparing in her public utterances, they were quite wrong about her changing day to day. Her Majesty provided a steady point of reference for generations, a constant in our modern history. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty was an exemplar of duty and standards, and we've heard a few comments about that today already, maintained over an almost unimaginable length of time for one person or even one country. Not all may agree with her standards or even with her duty, but all should respect them and Her Majesty's commitment to her unique and heavy role. Mr. Speaker, in the course of her duties, she was present throughout many significant changes in how our lives were lived, how we viewed what was acceptable and what was not, and how we even thought about it. And today's world is very much not the world in which Her Majesty started her reign. And as a result, the end of her reign has been the occasion of much remembering across the world. Much of it pleasant, but some of it frankly quite unpleasant. And although Her Majesty's position as Queen, which she did not choose, would not allow her to speak fulsomely and frankly on history during her lifetime, I believe that Her Majesty would accept it as her duty that her death might be a catalyst for us all to reflect on that history so that we might learn from it, and with that learning, inform our own standards and our own duties to our country and our people. And Mr. Speaker, if we could carry out our own duties with even a fraction of the dignity and dedication as Her Majesty, we in turn would be doing a great service to our own people. So to King Charles III and other members of the royal family, I extend my sincere condolences and wish that Her Majesty the Queen may rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Dakuda. Senator Tucker, would you like to make your remarks at this point? Good morning.
It is indeed a privilege to be here today to celebrate the life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I wish to express condolences to King Charles and the royal family, and to all persons in Bermuda and around the world who loved and revered Her Majesty the Queen. On the cover of today's agenda, there's a photo of Her Majesty the Queen, and beneath her picture is her birth date, a dash, and then the date of her passing. Her Majesty's dash reflects a life well lived by a woman who recognized her call to duty and as a young woman dedicated her life to public service. World leaders had the privilege of meeting the Queen, have delivered tributes, and many described her as being a stabilizing force and a steady hand as a guide. They have also talked about her charm, great wit, sense of humor, and warmth and responsible leadership. Those of us who watched from the sidelines were afforded the opportunity to see her as many described, especially as she encouraged and reassured so many during the most difficult times. We have all seen in the media and learned about a remarkable monarch that lived full, serving people, but let us not forget that she was also a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. She lived and loved her family, and what is plain to see is that they equally loved their mummy, as King Charles recently called her before the media, and Granny, as we have heard Prince Harry also refer to her. Her Majesty has run her race and has finished the course that was set before her. And she did it with grace, dignity, warmth, and a sense of humor, and most of all, she did it with style. Madam President earlier stated a quote that came from Her Majesty, and I will also repeat that quote. I'm going to end today with the line, and the quote on leadership that has been attributed to the Queen, that I believe is an example and encouragement to all of us as we move forward in our own commitments to public service. The quote, as I restate, is, "I know of no single formula for success, but over the years I have observed that some attributes of leadership are universal and are often about finding ways of encouraging people to combine their efforts, their talents, their insights, their enthusiasm, and their inspiration to work together." I pray these words from a woman whose life and leadership has had a significant impact on the world, and that her words of collaboration will become a tool in the hands of us to help us to learn from the past and to build a better tomorrow. This important lesson is just one of the many gifts that Her Majesty the Queen has left us that we can readily apply today. And by modeling the way for future generations that will also read our dash and judge us according to the impact of the legacy that we leave behind. Hopefully, our legacy will be one of great leadership, responsibility, grace, and most of all, committed service to improving the lot of mankind in Bermuda and in the world. May Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Members, senators, and MPs, that brings us to the end of the list of members who had indicated they wish to make remarks today. We're now on the Premier to move the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now approve the following motion. Be it resolved that this Honorable House do herewith agree to send the gracious messages from the members of the Legislature of Bermuda as recorded this 16th day of September 2022 to His Majesty King Charles III.
Any objections? There are none. The motion has been moved.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House, in joint session with the Honorable Senate, do adjourn until the 23rd of September 2022.
Thank you, Premier. The House will now stand adjourned until next week, Friday. As we close, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping again for our listening audience, just to re-emphasize that this was a special joint sitting to pay tribute to the passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. It's not often that we have joint sittings. In my memory, having been one of the longest-serving members in Parliament, I can only think of a couple as I stand here right now, the last being the anniversary of the 68 constitutional order, when we celebrated that in 2018, and I think on the occasion of the passing of sitting members of Parliament in previous years. So we recognize this as being really a rare occasion for us, and it's due fitting for the service that the Honorable Queen gave in the length of her reign, the length of the type of honor and standard that she set, not only for the monarchy, but all of us in the political world, and how we conduct ourselves as we represent those who put us here to represent them. With that, members, enjoy your weekend, enjoy the holiday. Remember the reason for the holiday, and take time to reflect on the family. Those remarks, the House now stands adjourned.